deceased, my brother John, and an adopted sister, Liliana. My father passed away in the early 1950s when I was really young, and my mother was widowed in her mid 30s. She made the decision to make a future for her family in India and started the travel agency. I want to point out the Chinese in Calcutta came in many different waves, as is probably the history of most Chinese exoduses. And Barbara Puchin and myself came in a much later group of folks, and primarily as a result of events preceding, during, and after the Second World War. Most of the early Chinese settlers in Calcutta were from southern China and spoke the southern dialects. The cohort migrants of my parents' generation were mostly from northern China and spoke the northern dialects. This posed a barrier to both communities, linguistically and socially. Therefore, most of the later arrivals sought to integrate with the prevailing Western culture at the time by sending their kids to the best English-speaking schools in town. My siblings and I all went to parochial schools run by Irish nuns and priests. I went to Catholic primary school and Anglican middle and high schools in Calcutta and Darjeeling. It's funny how Darjeeling keeps popping up, but that's where the best tea comes from. Because India had just become independent in 1947, there were still many European expats living and working in Calcutta in the 1950s and 1960s. Hence, the decision that my mom made to open a travel agency. My mom, out of necessity, was one of the first Chinese women in Calcutta to drive an automobile. And in the early 1960s, she joined the Calcutta Motorsports Club, which is still in existence today, and would compete in motorcar racing events with other male drivers. She always got a lot of media coverage, which was great free advertising for the travel business. She would throw big parties, and my older brother and sister would help. I was too young to be seen around, and I would be upstairs sneaking previews from the balcony. Sometimes my mom would have a whole suckling pig as the centerpiece on the food table, and you can only imagine the oohs and the hours from the guests. One of my funniest memories that I can recall is when Air India, the national air carrier, first introduced jet aviation to India with the Boeing 707 in 1960. They had an inaugural flight in Calcutta, and folks in the travel business were invited. Of course, my mom brought the entire family along. We were not all seated together because there were so many people, and I was only 10 years old. When the stewardess offered me a beverage in a small bottle, I said yes. When she came around for refills, I said yes again. Except the apple juice that tasted so good wasn't apple juice. They were little bottles of champagne. So after the plane landed, they pretty much had to carry me off the plane. So I started my alcohol journey very, very young. Other than business dealings, the two communities of Chinese stayed pretty much, they kept to themselves. We did, however, go to restaurants in the old Chinatown to eat. Barbara's family and our family belonged to the same social circle, and we were sad to see so many families leave after the 1962-1963 Indo-Chinese War. I left Calcutta in 1969 to come to university here in the United States. Some American friends had sons of friends who had come to Calcutta for a visit. And when they found out that I was interested in engineering, they recommended their alma mater in New Jersey. I got both my bachelor's and master's degrees in New Jersey, and I met my lovely wife, Jane, in New York. And as they say, it was destiny to be. We came to DC for work, again, friends of friends. Then we went to Saudi Arabia for work, and started our young family. When it was time to come back to the United States in 1986, we couldn't think of a better place than here in the Northern Virginia, where we had lived before we went to Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm going to add this little piece about how we all got together. So one Sunday afternoon, this was before we had met Barbara and Puchin, Jane had gone to an OCAW meeting. And she calls me on the phone and she says, "Do you know Barbara?" Now, being a man, I didn't know how I really should answer. But as is always prudent, I always answer a question with a question. So I said, "What's her last name?" "York," she replied. I said, "Oh, Alice, Louise, Maria, Rosie." And as they say, the rest of it is this story. So I want to thank you all for your patience in listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Puchin for the last words.
That's lovely. Thank you. All right. This is the epilogue. Thank you very much for listening to our stories. And like every good story, there is an underlying one. The subtext of the story of the Chinese in India is reminiscent of what happened to them in this country in the latter part of the 19th century, which is why the 1882 foundation was founded, and the work that they are trying to do now. The mission of the 1882 foundation is to promote public awareness of the history and continuing significance of Chinese execution laws in the United States. There is a parallel experience for the Chinese in India. In the late 50s and early 60s, my grandmother, my father, my sister and brother lived through that experience. It is a story that has been undocumented in the Indian history books. In the early 60s, there were rumors of unrest in the eastern Himalayas near Nepal, China, Tibet, and India border region. It seems war had broken out. Most of the Chinese were not worried because we assumed China was creating trouble in the border areas to distract problems within their own Politburo. So no one panicked. However, India took the skirmishes seriously, but they were losing the conflict. They were unprepared and poorly armed soldiers. Those thin mud collecting canvas shoes and icy wind traveling long baggy shorts were totally inadequate for the high Himalayas. So to boost morale, somehow a show of strength was needed. What better way than to round up a few Chinese people in the border states and cities like Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram, Darjeeling and Calcutta in West Bengal, etc. In the small hours of one morning, they were rudely awakened by loud bangs and the soldiers holding fat sticks, which is called lati in Hindi. Over 2,000 people were arrested without charges and taken to local jails. They were then rounded up and put into a train in Kolkata and taken across the country to Deoli, Rajasthan, and held in a political detention camp. These innocent people were incarcerated from a few months to over 5 years. They were ordinary, apolitical people, shop owners, shoemakers, restaurateurs, import-exporters, carpenters, hairdressers, dentists, travel agents, teachers, factory workers, etc. None of them had even possessed a gun. They probably even hadn't seen one except in the movies. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I get a little bit, yeah. But finally, they were all released. They kept their sufferings and their stories to themselves, picked up whatever pieces they had got and got on with their lives. Those who could returned to a China they never knew. Some went to England, some to Taiwan, and to Caribbeans and to America. A very large group emigrated to Canada, which was the most welcoming nation at that time. They entombed their horrific experiences and never spoke of them again. The native Indian citizens had no clue. A page had been omitted in the Indian history books. Finally, Ying Marsh, my younger sister, decided to write a book called Doing Time with Nehru. to tell their story. This was like a decades-old rusty faucet got the WD-40 treatment. Then the stories flooded out. They got organized and called themselves the Wallas after the camp in which they were interned. But I was not there, and I did not suffer as they did. This is their story, and I leave it up to them to tell it. Now, to go back to our three families, since our parents knew that our life would not be secure and safe anymore, they decided to leave India. Both Francis's and Barbara's families moved to the US and UK, respectively. Moved to US and Hong Kong, respectively. I was already in DC with my own little family. Eventually, my parents also immigrated to the US. First my mother and my siblings, and finally my father, who was the last of the family to be left out of the earth. Somehow we all ended up in Northern Virginia, our adopted new homeland or fatherland. We have already heard how the three families finally met. Yes, a veritable miracle. As I said in the beginning of this epilogue, this is not a unique story. The Japanese, but in a much larger scale after the Second World War, suffered worse and longer humiliation and injustice. Fast forward to the end of the 20th century, saw thousands of people from the Middle East and Africa escaped to Western Europe. And those Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are still crowding in an already poor and overpopulated Bangladesh. The list goes on, and even now, there's a never-ending stream of refugees trying to enter our country from the southern border. Wherever they came from, and whoever they are, they're all running from dangerous, oppressive regimes and dire poverty. The hope is to find food, shelter, education, and new lives in a richer, kinder, and safer society, hearkening to the blessings of Miss Liberty. Leaving your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, and yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse over your teeming shores. Sorry. Alas, most recently, we Chinese are once more on the receiving end of jealousy, hatred, and violence. Again, we ask, why? Why? We do not understand. Will this 1882 Exclusion Act be upon us again? Is it time for us to seek yet another new fatherland? We are Americans. We love this country. We proudly and gratefully received our citizenships many years ago. I remember I wept and could hardly sing the national anthem, which I had so proudly learned when I received mine. I reiterate, most of the initial immigrants had nothing when they arrived. This time, if we are persecuted to the point of being forced to leave, what will the Chinese take with them? Their expertise, their entrepreneurship, their originality, the raison d'etre of hard work. Talk of a massive brain drain. Yikes, wow. Let's not even begin to think about what fabulous Chinese restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Poochen, Francis, and Barbara for telling us your stories. And thank you, Poochen, for your last words. And thank you for courageously speaking out against any type of hatred, discrimination. And we at the 1882 Foundation stand strongly with you and with our community members, with community organizers, to make sure that we continue to tell our stories, to speak out against anything that could harm anyone. And that's really what is beautiful about this moment here that we're sharing today, is that we're hearing stories that unfortunately haven't been told as widely as they should. And I think that's why everyone is with us today, because we are interested and we want to support one another. So thank you again, all three of you. And thank you to our audience members for joining in with us today. And I also want to share with our panelists, since you've been busy presenting, that many of our audience members have introduced themselves as individuals who were born in or have lived in Calcutta, and they are deeply appreciative of you sharing your stories today. And someone even said that they recognize some individuals in the photos, so that is always good to hear. And I also want to encourage everyone to continue to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and also to continue to introduce yourselves. But yes, wanted to share that everyone is very appreciative of you guys being here today. And so I did see a few questions come in. So I'm going to start off by maybe something a little bit lighthearted, but we did hear a lot of colorful stories about food. So I'm sure some of us are a little bit hungry now, but could you guys name a Indian Chinese, or I think we use the term Chindian, food that you miss? Is there any dish that you miss?
Oh, I think for my end, very good chili chicken. There's no place that makes it as well as in Calcutta.
Sounds delicious. And Francis?
Actually, there's a really good, I think, I forget what they call them, Indo-Chin restaurant
Yeah,
here in Alexandria, in the old Cameron Station development over there. It's a great restaurant. Food is good, and the cook is a Nepalese gentleman, the chef. He's not a cook, he's a chef. And he does a wonderful rendition of what the Chinese food in India actually tastes like. There was one more thing. We didn't present any photographs of Calcutta, and I thought I'm going to try and put this on a share screen. But if I don't succeed, Yilin, if you can help out. So let me try. Oh.
Looks like it's coming up.
Okay, here we go. So this is Calcutta in the 1950s. Now, the brochure showed two buildings of buildings that looked like they were marble. Well, this is the Victoria Memorial, which was built by the British to celebrate Queen Victoria's 80th, 90th, I can't remember, birthday celebration. And
60th, yeah.
Oops, how do we advance this? Uh-oh, lost it.
Stop share and share.
Let's see.
Well, let me share again.
And while you look for that, Francis, looks like it's coming up. Getting a lot of exciting comments about food here. So people are looking for you to give a food tour at some point too. Hopefully when we can be in person.
Not going. Okay.
I think if you can probably just click on the slide on the left-hand side.
Okay, so everybody recognizes this, and so for us coming from Calcutta to Washington D.C., looks good. This is the Howrah Bridge, which is the first bridge of its kind across a major river. It's a cantilevered bridge. It was built in, I think, 1907 by the British, and it goes from one side of the Hooghly River, where Calcutta sits, to the other side. This is St. Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta, for many famous events like state funerals and anybody would and celebrate Mass over here. This is the Hooghly River. In the 1950s and 60s, it was pretty primitive. Again, this was shortly after independence and the partition. These were migrants going from east to west and west to east, from what was then Bangladesh to India or from India to Bangladesh. This is just a street scene from Calcutta in the 50s and 60s. This is actually a very famous street. It's called Park Street, and it's still there today. And it's probably the center of the entertainment world in Calcutta. Now, in case you thought Calcutta was a backwater and, not world class, this is why Calcutta, there was a mix of expat life, and this was the other side of the coin. This is Calcutta today. This is the Bara Bazaar area, which is close to where the old Chinatown used to be. Talking about food, I said I was a foodie. This is breakfast in Chinatown. On the sidewalk, much as it would be anywhere in Asia. Everybody knows what these are: Chinese sausages. Chinatown has since moved from the old Chinatown area, and it's really, really shrinking. This is a typical street scene in the shrinking Chinatown today. And this is another scene of the shrinking Chinatown. And probably in this picture, the only clue would be this sign here in the top right-hand corner, which is actually written in Chinese. That's it as far as photographs.
Wow, thank you for sharing, Francis. So getting a lot of great questions here. And I think showing the pictures of the shrinking Chinatown is a great segue for this question. Do you know of efforts to preserve the Chinatown in Calcutta, and are you involved? And I think I'm going to combine another question. Is the Chinatown in Calcutta where most of the Chinese live, or are there other areas that they have really lived in? So I'll start with the first question: is what are the preservation efforts for the Calcutta Chinatown? Yes, Puchen.
Yeah, there really isn't, because most of the Chinese have moved out to a new section, which used to be outside the main center of Calcutta. And they have established there now, called Tapa or Tangra. But the remnants but the people who are left back in the city center are basically near the tail end of their lives, kind of thing. But they still go there because the Indians, some of the Indians and other Chinese, they know that they still have the Sunday market, Sunday breakfast market. And it's very few, and it's kind of pathetic, but they are moving out, and there's nothing being, But the Bengalis themselves now are coming to this market and enjoying the food. Before it was mostly Chinese.
I see. And how big is the current Chinese community in Calcutta?
Oh, I don't know, actually. Do you know?
I read something. If you're interested in the Chinese in Calcutta and India in general, there's a lot of stuff on the web. Just search Chinese in India, Chinese in Calcutta. There's a lot of stuff on Google. Just Google it. There's also some really interesting videos on YouTube. Just Google or YouTube search for Chinese food or Chinese in Calcutta. There's some really neat stuff out there that even I wasn't aware of until the three of us started on this Talk Stories project.
But can I add something? The time that we were talking about in the 50s and 50s, actually, I think the peak arrived at about 300,000 people, Chinese people in Calcutta or in India. And most of them were in Calcutta. But since the 1960 problems, not only did they move abroad, they've gone into other cities. There are quite a few of them now in Mumbai, in Mumbai, and some in Chennai. Well, it's before they were mostly concentrated in Calcutta. And they're also now
The most recent figure that I saw, Puchin, was there were about 2,000 to 3,000 Chinese in Calcutta.
In Calcutta, yeah.
Not a whole lot.
But the thing is, the Chinese tended to stay with them among themselves until quite recently, actually. Now they're integrating. They're learning the Indian languages wherever they are, Bengali, Hindi, wherever they happen to be, or Marathi or something. So they're trying to integrate into the Indian society now, and they love Bollywood dancing. And actually, the Chinese Indians are now eating Indian food. Well, we Chinese tend to eat all Chinese food all the time, but the Indians are they're trying to integrate themselves now, which is, I think, a good thing.
Yes.
So they are basically Chindians, as I call them.
Thank you for those great answers. And so this one is related. There's a question about the Indian Chinese community that most of them migrate to Toronto. Is that true?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Except for the 3 of us.
And let's see here. Lots of great questions coming in, and also just want to thank our audience members for also saying thank you for sharing. I'm just going to read a very nice comment here. Fabulous photos and personal stories. Thank you so much. Your accents and the strong British influence remind me of my own history in the early 1960s in Singapore. We have another question that just came in. Can anyone speak more about the Deoli internment camp? I assume that was part of the Sino-India War. Any panelists to the Japanese internment camps in US during World War II? And who can take that question first?
To describe the physical?
I guess to describe more about the Deoli internment camp.
Yeah, it's actually my sister's story. I think maybe you can organize them to tell their story. But it was a political camp, and I think my sister told me the reason why she named that book "Doing Time with Nehru" was that our family, stayed in the same cottage that Nehru was interned in during the independence struggle, and it was
To answer that question. I read Puchin's sister's book. It's an excellent book. And yes, there are very, very similar parallels between that and the Japanese internment camps during World War II.
Got it. Thank you. And we're going to go right back to some of the food questions. Here's a good one. How do you drink your teas? Since we did talk about teas, do you drink it with milk like the British?
yes.
But we drink green tea the right way.
How about you, Barbara?
I drink it every way. Green tea is totally Chinese, and I drink it like the Chinese with nothing. If I'm having a very good English tea like Earl Grey, then yes, with milk and sugar. But at tea time, not just willy-nilly. But
Great.
yes, tea is a good part of our diet. It continues to be.
But also,
Wonderful.
we drink it with condensed milk.
Oh, that sounds very good.
Very good.
That's the Indian way. Indian way is condensed milk. Yeah.
And sometimes we put in cardamom or ginger and almond slivers.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It can be quite elaborate too, not just like how I dump milk into my coffee.
No, you never dump.
Dump.
You're gonna have cucumber sandwiches with it.
Put in the
cucumber
milk
sandwich.
first, and then pour in the tea gently.
Okay. We actually need probably another Zoom just for that. So thank you also. One of our audience members said this is the most fascinating talk story I've attended on Zoom. Thank you so much. And also thank you to Wei for putting the name of the book by Miss Yin Marsh. It's called Doing Time with Nehru, Life Before the India-China Border War. So for any of you who are interested, it is in the chat box, so you can Google that. A question is, how are all of you keeping yourselves busy during the pandemic? Who would like to start?
Barbara?
I think for me, like everyone else, my big endeavor once I retired, which was 2 years before the pandemic, was to study Chinese for the first time, the language. So I've been trying with a great deal of difficulty to learn how to read, speak, and write Chinese, and it's been totally fraught. But other than that, it's the same. I think as everyone's been struggling along with trying to keep our distances and keep safe. And now all of us have been vaccinated, so we've gotten together quite a few times since we were preparing for this.
That's wonderful. And Puchen,
Well,
have you been doing during the pandemic?
well, mainly my imagination has been going wild. So I've been writing little short stories, and picking out little memories of the past and weaving them into stories.
Oh,
And I've
wonderful.
produced 2 books during these last 2 years.
Oh,
Short
great.
story books, yeah.
So you may be publishing an anthology of short stories in the future.
Not an anthology. I've only published 2 books. Short stories, yeah.
Well, we look forward to it if you do. And how about you, Francis? Drinking more apple juice?
No. No, I've been, because I'm in construction and working on facilities for American University, I was actually going into work every day until a couple of weeks ago. Now I'm working from home and trying to adjust to it, like everybody has been doing for over a year, and it's not easy.
It isn't. Yeah. So we have another question here. Was there, actually these 2 questions are together, so it's an interesting pair. Was there any intermarriage, and does anyone drink Indian chai? So the first question is, was
First
there any
question, no.
intermarriage?
Second question, yes.
Okay.
Francis, first question, no. The second question, yes.
Same here.
Yeah, we there are a lot of good Indian restaurants around here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And I'm sure whether it's Barbara or Puchen and myself will go in there and ask for real chai, and we'll speak in Hindi so that they don't make the fake stuff. Yeah, we do drink a lot of Indian chai.
There's one little thing that's kind of sometimes bothers me. When restaurants or little baristas serve chai tea, that's like saying tea. Because chai is tea. Chai tea. You should remove the word tea. Either use chai or tea. And that really bothers me. I'm old now, 80, so I can say it.
Now that I think of it, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
It's a coffee kahawa.
Right, coffee.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I cover all these questions. So that's why I'm going back in this chat box. Here's another one. What is the significance of Wallas?
Walla is just a person who does something. If you're washing clothes, you're a clothes walla, washing clothes walla, dhobi walla. If you're selling oranges, you're an orange walla. So walla is a person that does something particular. And
Walla is either related to a profession or it's related to a place. So if you came from Bombay, for instance, you'd be called a Bombay walla. If you made tea, you'd be called a chai walla. So it's used interchangeably. And in fact, there is a masculine and a feminine to it. There's a walla and a wali. But in this case, we decide, we're just going to use the one and not get too confusing. So the common one is walla. So Calcutta walla, we would be Washington, D.C. wallas right now.
Now, when I was growing up in school, we used to call the people that the boys who went to St. Paul's school that Francis went.
Yeah, I know, chatawallas.
We call them chatawallas.
You know why that is?
Yes,
chata
and in Hindi, chata is umbrella. So these boys always carried umbrellas. So we always call them Chatawalas. To me, you're still a Chatawala.
And the reason the guys from St. Paul's, which is where I went to high school, were called Chatawalas is because the school is the highest school in the world. It's at over 8,000 feet elevation. And
Wow.
the walk from town to school was quite a ways, and it always rains in Darjeeling. So you had to have your umbrella. So we were called the Chatawalas.
That's a great story. So let's see here, a couple more questions or a few more questions. There is a Indian singer of Chinese descent who has become famous in India named Chang. Have you ever heard of him or heard him sing?
No, but in Toronto, he's very popular
Oh,
because there's a huge Chinese from Calcutta Chinese in Toronto.
wow.
And in fact, in September, when they celebrate the Hakka Day, the national day for them, they come out on stage and sing Bollywood songs. All these Chinese people doing Bollywood dancing and sing Bollywood songs.
Wow, that's very interesting, the intercultural connection. And going back to the food questions, is there any chance that any of you would be soliciting recipes for a Chindian cookbook? Or maybe you could put it together yourselves.
We've tried. My sisters and I have worked on recipes together. My mother actually, my sister Louise put together my mother's recipes, but they were more in the Chinese end. And then my other sisters, we've tried to collaborate on some of the Chinese Indian dishes and then the Anglo-Indian dishes, because that's, that was what we were so used to. But yes, maybe in the we're thinking about a book.
That's wonderful. And I'm just taking a look at all of these questions. Are you, where else are you sharing your stories? This forum, everyone has been very fascinated and interested. Are you going to be sharing your stories in other forums in the months to come?
Not that we know of at this time. This was a brainstorm by Francis and Ted, and then they corralled us into it. So I think depending on, we never thought to tell the story, in all honesty. At least I didn't. But now that we've started it, it is an interesting story. So yes, going forward.
Well, after we met and having attended many of Ted and Stan's talk stories in Chinatown, when this happened, I just got the idea that, this might be interesting. And so I asked Stan and Ted if they'd be interested, and they very graciously said, absolutely. And so I spoke to Barbara and Puchin, and we agreed to do it. And this has been another thing we've been doing during COVID-19.
No, that's great. I'm sure we would love to hear these stories told in more and more forums. And I am going to read another audience member comment. I think this is a very thoughtful comment. Your stories remind me of the Chinese in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of some of the similarities in growing up among people of East Indian origin. There were also people from England, Portugal, Latin countries, etc. I'm guessing your growing up experiences may be somewhat similar: school holidays, day off for Diwali, Indian holidays, and the culinary arts as well. So thank you to Regina for that comment. And another audience member is saying, please document this story. It is very fascinating about how all of you reconnected after so many years.
It really is phenomenal. Just, the fact we were so close, and then, all these years go by and you never even think. I never ever thought I'd see Francis again. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, it really happened because my wife, who I'm going to introduce right now, has an amazing characteristic. She's like Columbo the detective. So here she is.
Oh, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you
So
so much.
the minute she heard somebody was from a Chinese person from Calcutta, that was it. She was on it like a bloodhound on blood.
That's wonderful. No, thank you for joining us. Would you like to say a few words, or we have just an incredible group of people who are very interested in the stories your husband and Puchin and Barbara have shared with us today. And I'm sure you also have very interesting stories yourself.
So as my husband had always told me that I have missed my mission in my life, I should have been a policeman and interrogator instead of what I do, you know. So I mean, I ask a lot of questions when I meet people, but that was interesting. It's just because it's interesting to me, you know. And so in this case, it was really, really exceptional. And I want everybody to know, talking about food, to prepare for this talk, I must have gained 10 pounds because we ate out, we ate together, and just last week, right before, we had to find an excuse to have dim sum, and I was amazed by us old people that can eat so much, you know? Which is a good sign. It's
a great sign. It's a
Yes.
sign that you like each other. You know, when you eat with people you like, I tend to eat more. So
Right. Yeah. But it's amazing. And really thank you for hosting this. Thank you, Ted and Stan and everybody else supporting the foundations to make all this thing happen. And it's a really, really great place to share these stories, share our lives, share, you know, how it's really exciting and interesting. Thank you.
thank you for being here. Yes, thank you on behalf of all of our audience members too. So I think we are going to move to Ted to say a few words in a couple minutes. And I do want to take maybe a couple more questions. One of which, just to wrap up our food questions, is since you guys are familiar with Northern Virginia, is there an Indian Chinese restaurant that you would recommend to everyone?
The one Francis mentioned in Alexandria, Indochen, is very, very good. There's another one in Merrifield called Bansari, and they have a few Indo-Chinese dishes, and Puchin and I ordered one of each, and it was okay. It was not perfect, but they were valiant effort to try. But other than that, really, not many Indian Chinese. It's pure Indian, which is very good. I mean, I will never sneeze at good Indian food, and I'll never sneeze at good Chinese food. It's just that sometimes that fusion is a little tricky.
Great. And let's see, here is a question about this individual is asking, in Singapore, we speak formally, which is what is considered the Queen's English. And so the question is, do you speak differently to someone that you would meet informally outside in the street, or is there a difference between the accents based on the situation?
Well, many years ago, when I was in Hong Kong, I don't speak Cantonese. I speak only Mandarin, you see. And everybody treated me like some kind of foreigner because the Hong Kong people, they don't want to hear Mandarin. So I decided, I decided that to speak English instead. And I put on the heaviest Queen's English I could muster. all kinds of response after that.
That's a great story. Barbara or Francis?
No, I think if you listen really closely, you will detect a slight Indian accent in all our accents, but the kind of the British accent dominates, and the Indian accent is still there. And people from Singapore and Malaysia, Chinese from there, will speak with almost the same accent. I suspect that would be true in probably the Caribbean islands as well, because of the British influence.
Because we all went to British schools, many of us, that's why. And we had to speak like the kid. We were taught, elocution was one of our classes. We had to speak like that.
Mhm. Great. So I think we have covered most, if not all, of these questions. And again, thank you to Poochen, to Barbara, to Francis for taking their time to be with us today. And thank you to all of our audience members for your very insightful questions and kind comments and telling us where you're listening in from with us today. And so now I'd actually, before I pass on to Ted, Poochen, Barbara, or Francis, would you like to say any last words?
Just thank you very much. Very, very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for letting us tell our story. At the end of the day, I think human beings have been doing this since the beginning of time, sitting around a campfire after maybe a good meal of satisfactory hunting and telling stories. And that's what this is.
That's great. Thank you.
Or running away from somebody.
Well, I think we have definitely heard from our audience that they would really like you guys to continue to tell your stories in multiple different forums, to document it, because it really means a lot. And I think it empowers more people to also tell their stories too, which is very important. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Ted, who is our executive director at the 1882 Foundation. Ted.
I want to thank Elian. Let's give Elian a good hand for being the great moderator she always is. But I also want to thank Barbara and Francis and Poochen. I really appreciate, Francis, your last statement, because that's what we've always said before. It continues a tradition we really want to foster, not just among Chinese Americans or other ethnic groups, but the tradition of gathering at a fireside after the hunt. In this case, we're hunting for good Chinese Indian food, right? And you're going to lead us to that. But to tell our stories, share our stories. And that sharing of stories helps us strengthen our identity, our community. You know, we've often said, Stan and I, that we do this because the telling of the stories and the sharing of those stories is what defines our community, strengthens it, and helps us move along. So it's great to have those stories always. And we are also reminding everyone else in this audience that you have a story to tell too. And it's just a matter of coming forth and talking with Stan and myself or anyone in our crew to say, schedule me for some time. I'd like to share some stories. And hopefully we can gather together, get you together with some people you haven't met until 40 years ago, right? And that's a wonderful thing as well. You know, one thing I want to do is, again, let's everyone give a shout out or a hand or a thumbs up or something for these wonderful speakers. Francis, we've been talking about this so long. I am so glad you finally did that. And again, it's also thanks to your wonderful wife, Jane, who keeps pursuing this thing. So one thing I want to do is that usually we, if I could share screen, I want to go just very quickly. I want to go back to mention something on the talk show we had last week, and I don't know if I made the impression correctly, but I wanted to say this again, and this is relating to the Congressional Cemetery and our Range 99 project. I don't know how many people really have gone to the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. It's a really wonderful place, very, very interesting, full of all kinds of monuments to different people, not necessarily the bodies. We have John Quincy Adams, and we also have everyone from him all the way down to, say, some American Indians who have died in Washington, D.C. and are interred there, and a whole range of people. The entire history of the United States is there, much more encompassing of the American story than say the Smithsonian, the Congressional Cemetery over at some other places. But one of the things that are there is an effort by us to sort of landscape an old place where the Chinese were buried, and there aren't any bones there. The only thing that's left there is the place where they were buried. So they're almost invisible. In fact, I would say they're invisible despite all that history is there. And so what we want to do is make sure that the Chinese American place in the American story is marked properly. And so what we've done is we did put a marker there and some benches, but we would like to landscape the place. And so we have a project which is called the Range 99 project. Range 99 is the location where the Chinese were buried. And as I said, if not for the marker, you would never know they were there. And the idea of having some kind of monument or memorial that places or gives us some visibility is very important. It's not only to remember the individuals there, but to remind the people in the American history, American story, there are Chinese Americans and Chinese American participation. And we need to bring that visible. So much more important these days. That the reason why some of the anti-Chinese violence or anti-Asian violence is because we're just not visible. And for us to not have at least a symbolic space that is visible in the cemetery that covers the entire United States history is actually a fault on our part for not putting something there and making it known that we are also part of that story. So it's important for us to mark that space. And we do have a project going forth. I mentioned that before in the last week and some other talks. And we need $12,000 in order to build this landscape area, which we've marked as where the Range 99 is. What I wanted to mention today also is that since last week's presentation, we actually have a donor who wants to remain anonymous, but she's wanting to match any donations people make up to $6,000. So if you guys can just reach down and find a couple of dollars and reach up to $6,000, then this donor will match that $6,000. And then we'll have the amount of money we need to build this memorial and this marker of Chinese American participation in the American history. Best thing to do if you want to do that is to make a check payable at 1882 Foundation, mark it as for Range 99, and then we can finish off this memorial. Which, if you think about it, where in Washington, D.C., or practically anywhere in the United States can you find a memorial to the Chinese American experience? And we are in the process. We can, if we do this, make a small memorial, and that will help contribute. That will help contribute to the idea of making sure that the Chinese American story is part of the American story that is encompassed in the Congressional Cemetery. So keep that in mind. The next event we're having is May. We have a series of presentations as part of the annual 1882 symposium. We're going to have several speakers, 3 webinars in a row. The first one will be talking about the concepts of Chinese American museums. We want to talk about the concept of community-centric museums and how do we approach the community in today's world that's more used to YouTube and digital processing. How do we reach out to them? The second day is going to be about how do we cope with COVID. In the last year, how did museums and historical societies develop new techniques and process by which they can bring people or share our stories? I think there's going to be some pretty exciting stories about what has been done and what can be kept. And the third day, we're going to be talking about certain trends and processes about education, public education, how we mix public educators in schools with teaching in places and with museums itself. So those are 3 of the topics generally that we're going to be talking about in the mid part of May 17, 18, and 19. And June and July and August, we have a number of other things which include talking about Jake Lee exhibits and some other stuff. But I think if you have a chance, you might be able to say a little bit more about what it is. One of the things I'm very excited about trying to do is get Harry Chow to talk about the Bruce Lee experience. So it'll be Bruce Lee and Harry. That'll be the title for that. I hope that in August, the pandemic and the COVID restrictions would have gone mostly away, that we have something which celebrate, we can come together maybe on the street, H Street, between the Chinatown Park and the building where we are. So that's next to near the 6 and I Synagogue, that little tree-lined street there. We hope we can close it off and have a little festival that celebrates the Double Seventh. And the Double Seventh, where people who know is the day in which the weaving maid and the cow herd come together. And so I feel like that's almost like a great symbolic way to announce that the pandemic is over and we can all escape getting into the streets and do chalk art on the street. And that's what we want to do in August. We're also going to have a couple of events related to commemoration and talking about the service to the country, and that's military service to the country. Part of it, a large part of it, will be about the Congressional Gold Medal, which the Chinese American World War II veterans got, but it'll also be talking about all service to the United States and all including potentially we could talk about sort of civilian service to the country. We also are going to have a session that I'm working on now, which is called the Page Act. It'll be one of our timeless echo series. And we'll be talking about the Page Act, which is the law before the 1882 exclusion laws that targeted Chinese women from coming to the United States because they were all seen as prostitutes. And we want to talk about the history of that and then have a panel to discuss how that relates to today's sort of sexualization of fetishization of Chinese American women and how that might relate to the recent Atlanta killings. So those are all the things we're looking for. And again, I remind you that we are interested in your story. And we're particularly interested now, Francis, to tell our stories over a Chinese Indian dinner, that if we can't find the right restaurant, then I think that Barbara and you, Francis, the foodie, can cook something for us. It would be great. Some of the things that I was really interested in, Barbara was talking about is, these special Chinese, these curries, the flavors that are different curries and so forth. So Barbara,
Yes.
you're on tap to
Okay. I'm on call for cooking.
okay, and creating the Chinese Indian cookbook. I think that's a fascinating project to do and it's worth doing. Put your stories between the cookbooks and the recipes, and that would be such a wonderful thing to do. So again, what we do now is we generally have a hangout session. So everyone should just unmute themselves or just stay on. We'll stay on for another 20 minutes or 30 minutes, depending upon what you want to talk about. And we're open for everything, even